Good afternoon. Thank you for attending our inaugural Blockchain Society event. I am super excited about this launch of a new society and our first events. We've been working very hard over the last 12 months to really think about what blockchain means in the real world and the applications that it really does mean to Georgia. And what we found is that there are a lot of applications that are not only proof of concept, but people are starting to think about blockchain in a lot of different applications. So we've actually published a flash report that you can find at tagonline.org, as well as some other information as well. So I'm excited to start this new society to offer technology companies and leaders with new opportunities to engage around the fast growth blockchain industry sector. And I think actually the pandemic is actually accelerating some of the opportunities that will actually lend themselves to blockchain solutions. As blockchain technology evolves, transforming multiple industries, the Blockchain Society will foster a collaborative environment for the development and exploration of expanding uses for blockchain technology. To see more of the Blockchain Society events and other TAG events, again, please go to visit tagonline.org. And now it's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce Roop Singh, the Blockchain Society co-chair and founder. He is the founder of the Intuit Factory, blockchain and education strategy firm, and Roop has given 2 TEDx talks on blockchain and tokenization and related areas. Roop, I just want to thank you for your partnership. I want to thank you for your leadership. I'm excited about today. This is a great kickoff. And so without further ado, I'm turning it over to you, Roop.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks for your leadership for creating this society and coming up with the task force about 1.5 years ago. And thank you all for joining. So the way this event will work is I'll go through some of the updates for the society, and then we will get to introduce our wonderful panelists, and then we'll get into the panel discussion, and then eventually we will get to some of your audience questions. So as we launch the society, here's something that we believe in, and this is our vision. So I'll let you take a look at this. The fundamental idea in my mind is to create an environment where we can openly discuss blockchain use cases that have currently been developed or are yet to be developed and treat it as a foundational technology that it is. We also want to make sure that we engage our TAG membership and allow those companies to give a competitive advantage using blockchain. Eventually, personally for me, there are 2 things that ring out. One is I want to raise the level of discussion, level of conversation, intellectual debate, whatever you want to call it, brainstorming in Georgia about blockchain and its potential applications. And then second, I want to move from potential to actually materializing, manifesting, creating useful blockchain use cases, piloting, creating POCs, and then eventually products. And we are here as a resource for you all to do that. Here's our team. I want to thank each and every one of people here. Stephen Pear, who is at BitPay, he's the one of the co-chairs along with me. And then we have Melissa Davis for membership, Jagrati Solanki for events, and Stacy Snizer for content, and Wamshi Mangapali as our CRM admin. If you are interested, there are a couple of open roles, so feel free to connect with us to engage with us on those roles. Upcoming events. So this is what our calendar looks like for the rest of the year. We have 3 upcoming events, and the way you would get notified for those is this. You go on to the Blockchain Society page on TAG's website, and here's the URL. You can go to join now, and you can fill out the interest form, and that'll keep you engaged with all of our events and all of our content that we share. And if you like to be a sponsor, you can contact us here, and we will be happy to share the benefits of sponsorship of TAG Blockchain Society with you. To me, eventually, and I said this in a lot of my talks, blockchain and a lot of emerging technology for that matter, it's a sport that you could either be a spectator or a player. The choice is yours. If you want to watch the sport being played on your screens, or on your phones and enjoy the sport as a spectator, sure, you're happy to do so. And some of us will just do that. But some of us are more enterprising and are very curious about these technologies and want to go deeper and actually want to create these use cases. We want to manifest these in real world. So we are here as a resource for you to make that happen. We can keep the conversation going. I would love to hear your ideas, your thoughts. This is your society as much as it's tags. It's the community that creates it. So you can write to me directly on LinkedIn or to any one of our committee chairs or co-chairs. And we are happy to listen to your ideas and incorporate them as we grow this nascent society. So with that said, let's move on to today's event. And boy, do we have a panel to make this launch happen. We're going to be talking about blockchain applications in the real world. And with us for that, we have Frank Hinek, Executive Director of Innovation Labs from NCR Corporation, Sherry Stein, Head of Technology Strategy for Americas at SITA, and Andrei Semenov, Director of Innovation for Supply Chain at Coke One North America. So please welcome all of these wonderful speakers, and we will get into the panel now. So thank you all for joining. Let's start with Frank. Frank, if you don't mind introducing yourself, your role at NCR, and as it relates to blockchain and developing blockchain use cases within NCR.
Sure, thanks, Roop. The role I have at NCR started about 2 years ago, and I joined from a background in technology consulting and really focused on helping, I'll say, the medium and large scale enterprises go through digital transformations, which has been a long running theme. It's manifested its ways in different formats for each company. But over the more recent years kind of led me to looking at some of the ways that emerging technologies are not being adopted by enterprise and some of the challenges of doing that in enterprise. And so I moved from being in a small organization to a fairly large corporation to tackle some of the challenges of actually taking this from a concept to a pilot to actually making a difference in the real world. And at NCR, the focus is on applying emerging technology, new consumer trends to serve our customers, which for those who aren't familiar with NCR, large global organization, we serve banks, retailers, and restaurants to help them operate their enterprise, the software, the services, and the hardware. And as it relates to blockchain, the innovation team that I lead is primarily responsible for driving the early stage of those efforts, exploring these new technologies, having these dialogues with our customers, as well as their consumers, the shoppers, the bankers, the restaurant goers, and to try to identify what are some of the hurdles and opportunities that we can actually help our corporation explore to solve these, to develop a business case, and then to help them transition into a real world use case that gets rolled out globally.
That's excellent. I'm sure we'll get into some of your insights in a few minutes. So thank you. Sherry, let's go ahead with you.
Hi, Roop. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Stein with SITA. We are based on Cumberland Boulevard, just up behind Cumberland Mall. We are about 5,000 people around the world, and we operate in the airline and airport technology space. So specifically, I've been with SITA now for last 5 years now, I think, coming up on 5. And I was originally in our SITA lab, which is the R&D arm focused on next generation technologies, collaboration with academia, startup communities, and looking at how do we solve some of the technical challenges that plague the air transport industry. A lot of that's oriented around the manual paper-laden processes and trying to move that into digital transformation and looking at what we can do to digitize those processes and create more integrated frameworks to help cut down on the disparate handoffs between entities. So I moved in early last year into the new role where I lead the technology strategy for the Americas, which focus specifically on the consumer needs for our marketplace within the United States, North America, South America, and what can we do to bring those technologies from the lab, from our product portfolio, and to help create solutions to help our customers with those business challenges. Specifically on blockchain. Yeah, I've led all of our, well, not all, but a majority of our blockchain initiatives around identity management, helping to educate the airline and airport industry. We created an aviation blockchain sandbox with more than 50 different airline participants to help build collaboration and understanding of the technology and to help continue to try to advance that cause.
Right, right. So for those of you who don't know, SITA is actually one of the largest technology providers for the airlines industry. And some of the use cases that Sherry and I have talked about that she has helped develop are on the cutting edge of airlines and travel and quite futuristic use cases. So I'm sure we'll get into some of the details in a few minutes. So thank you, Sherry, for being here. Andrei, let's go ahead with you.
Hi, Roop. Thanks. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Andrei Semenov. I'm a director of the innovation and supply chain area for the CONA North America, or CONA services. CONA, historically, CONA was developed as a template for the Coca-Cola bottlers to run their business, the back-end systems, everything that is related to the bottling business, from producing the Coca-Cola, distributing it across the network of the bottlers, and then selling it to the end customers who are retailers, convenience stores. And CONA North America specifically focused on the bottlers in North America. CONA was formed in 2013 as a part of the Coca-Cola company to serve 12 largest bottlers in North America from the technology perspective and consulting perspective. So we're a purely technology company. We're about 150 people based in Atlanta, Midtown. And as far as blockchain is concerned, we believe that by building the blockchain network for the Coca-Cola bottlers, we can represent this business network that the Coca-Cola bottlers represent today in today's world. In the US alone, there's about 70 mid, large, and small-sized bottlers that are operating as an independent companies. They operate as a franchise owners. And then worldwide, there's about 250 bottlers. So first, we'll look into the blockchain as an opportunity to build and grow the network internally to help solve and tackle some of the problems. But then as we grow the network, we're also looking into including suppliers and customers of the bottlers to help grow and automate the processes, specifically in the supply chain, but we're looking at blockchain broader than this.
Right, right. Thank you, Andrea. One of the things you would notice in this panel and as an intention for the society itself, you'll see a lot of different use cases being represented here, be it identity, be it supply chain, be it even payments. You'll see that as a worldview where we think blockchain is a foundational technology to be applied in multiple use cases. And there are very subtle distinctions between all the different use cases. And we'll get to all of them in a few minutes. But the idea is that we need to ensure that we cover the extent of this foundational technology, essentially the next wave of the internet. So let's get into that. You know, we're all living in this state of pandemic, and slowly things are starting to change, at least here in the United States. So the question that comes in my mind is, I think we've gone through a phase of a few months globally where we've had to go inside of ourselves personally and as companies, and figure out, well, something needs to change as a society. Something needs to change for our values. Even our needs may have changed. And you'll see that as an acceleration in digitization globally. And you'll see that in multiple different ways. So my question to you is, what role do you think blockchain will play in a post-pandemic world? Which use cases or which problems do you think blockchain could solve for in this post-pandemic world as we regroup and recreate and rebuild a new world for us? Anybody who wants to go first?
Sure, I'll add some thoughts. I mean, I think one of the things we've seen, and this gets back to the point you made earlier around this global situation that we're dealing with now, is in some sense made some of the original plans we had maybe change priorities, change some of the timelines. But I think in some specific areas, and in fact, several that relate to blockchain, we've seen it actually accelerate plans. And so an example of that I think is relative to both the health aspect as well as just the ability to continue doing, the normal things you need to do to survive each week, is around identity. And so there's this aspect of, how do we understand who is interacting with different places physically, right? And understanding contact tracing. There's been lots of press about how do we do that, both in a way to keep ourselves healthy, but also secure and maintain our privacy. And then, for a large segment of our customers, this has been an extremely challenging time, and we hear from them how hard it is to continue operating. And there's others, let's say the grocery space, that are busier than they've ever been, right? And so you're trying to figure out how do you keep people fed, keep your employees safe, and do that in a way that maintains the safety and in a lot of ways eliminates as many touch points as possible, right? Things that previously I think we're moving towards a society where things are more directed in terms of self-service, using a mobile device, right? Being able to do things without going to somebody to help you do that. And in fact, now with the intent of removing contact, digital identities become a much more, I think, interesting area to accelerate the plans. And so for us, the way we've seen that manifest is how do we begin to share information privately in a secure way across different entities? And how do we do some of the things we formerly did around payments, around understanding, are you old enough to buy something in a store? Doing these things in a way that is secure and is not siloed. And I think for us, that's one of the interesting and I think attractive applications of blockchain is the ability to build a network that multiple parties who may not have a business relationship, may not trust each other, but can nevertheless connect and share an understanding of who somebody is, what do we know about them that they're willing to share, and enable them to pay frictionlessly and securely, prove their age, and also, potentially even understand who might be, got sick, was in a certain area. And then for us, that has actually accelerated these conversations around actually bringing digital identity, into the hands of consumers and allowing them to do this. And I think that juxtaposed with the intense concern around privacy that's only been growing over the recent years has made it that much more valuable to do things in a zero knowledge proof way, in a way that can be controlled by the individual and give them the right to opt in or opt out of these things and still maintain some of the things that aren't potentially an opt out option, like safety and health.
Yeah, very well. So I think that's a very appropriate use case for blockchain, looking at identity and the other side of the coin for it, privacy. And blockchain technologies offer a perfect solution for privacy preserving way while we still are able to share identity. And the ownership of that identity still remains with the user and not is lost with a third party entity like a government or a company. So those are some values for me. I'm curious, as we start opening up and start bringing the economy back up online, and we start traveling, Jerry, do you see immunity passports and things of that nature come up in your conversations with the airlines?
There's a lot of discussion around health declarations, in particular, as part of a border management process for having the right to travel or the right to fly. And, a lot of that, though, because of the lack of proper vaccine records or, ability to do anything other than a self-asserted affirmation, right? I don't have a fever, I swear, let me fly, right? So there's a lot of work to be done around making sure that those things can be done in a way that protects privacy, protects commerce, and our civil liberties, while also protecting other passengers in the marketplace. And so, we're not treading lightly there, right? We're really taking a very thoughtful approach at what technologies we look at and what solutions we bring to the marketplace in order to help support those initiatives. Right. But I absolutely see from a border management perspective why a government, could see the need for adding health declarations as part of your right to enter a country in the same way that they do today with customs and immigration forms.
Interesting. So, if you could share this publicly, I'm not sure, but how close are we to such applications actually making way into our real life and into our travel plans?
Well, from a border management perspective, a lot of countries do that today. When you enter a country, they have landing card forms that you have to fill out. Some of them have different forms. They might want marketing data. They might want to know what hotel you're staying at. But importantly, they also want to know when you're scheduled to leave and making sure that you do that within the right visa stay requirements. And when things like, H1N1 or SARS, they do have the agricultural disclosures as well, right? The foot and mouth disease. Have you been in any of these countries? Have you, been on an agricultural area? Those are already in existence today. But because many of them are printed on paper and distributed on paper, it's a lot harder for the countries or the airlines to be able to react dynamically to the malaise du jour, not to take COVID lightly, of course, but so what we're looking at is how do we digitize those forms to make them more dynamically adaptable, and of course to tie in things like blockchain to prove the provenance of the data as well. So I think those are things that we'll continue to see evolve.
I mean, to me, it's a natural trajectory. We go there now or in a few months. Eventually, we will, just because the technology is available now, I think we should be able to do it. Okay, let's move on to next set of questions. Andrei, did you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on top of what's already been said. I think these are all use cases, both Sherry and Frank described. From the supply chain perspective, what we've seen is a lot of disruption in the supply chains, especially with growing demand in certain products and some of the organizations or restaurants being closed. So the demand's shifted, and I think there's an opportunity for building the blockchain solutions to provide more visibility into the supply chain transactions, and also the visibility to the inventory, for example, from retailer to the visibility of inventory to their suppliers and maybe their planning cycles, and then providing to the suppliers the information about the store's demands and how they see it, just extending it further to what maybe they have today with the integration on just the order processing between their supplier and the retailers. I can see this as a good use case as well, where you have multiple businesses maybe not having enough trust between them today, but using the blockchain to build this trust to open up some of the information to allow supply chain operate more frictionless.
You said the key word, trust. We cannot have a blockchain conversation without using that word. So I'll ask you the same question that I asked Sherry. How close do you think we are in real world implementation of that specific use case of supply chain between different supply chain partners?
So I think what we're going to cover today and what I'm going to cover during my presentation on the use case, I'll present what we've already done. We already have the live use cases, but as far as working with trading partners who are external to our system, I think the big work there is on just building this relationship. I don't think there is a lot of work to be done, or really hard work or unknown work to be done as far as the technology is concerned. Definitely a lot of work required there, but it's building this relationship between the businesses, building the trust, and just coming up with these use cases and investing into it as a consortia, not as a separate company in silos, but as a consortia, try to solve those issues. So I think we're getting closer there. As you can see, everybody's doing their own developments inside. If you look into Walmart's and Targets of the world, and also from the supplier perspective, you see a lot of interest there as well. Just I think in a few years, or maybe sooner, because of the COVID situation, there's going to be some use cases where the companies will start creating this circles, maybe not necessarily the big network for everybody, but they'll start creating this circles to connect few key suppliers, retailers together.
Right, right. So since you already started on that, our next section is on blockchain use cases in your organization, the journey you cover. So why don't you key up your slides? And as we do, I'll wrap up the previous section. To me, the use cases that the pandemic is accelerating for blockchain are the following. I can easily see maybe there is a bigger pandemic in the future where we are not able to go to voting. And we've seen that in some of the recent developments in elections. So online voting is a very significant use case that I think we should develop in the case that we are not able to physically go to votes. Immunity passports is one that we've already mentioned. And then to me, identity records just beyond immunity passports becomes relevant, as we've talked about. The one use case which I found really fascinating is the following. I don't know if many of you knew this, but when the first bill was passed in the, I believe in the House for coronavirus stimulus, there was a very interesting segment of it, which was to create a United States dollar, but a digital cryptographically secure blockchain-based dollar. And what that also included is creating digital wallets for people. So what that could do is we could have direct deposit into those digital wallets, almost circumventing the current set of financial players like banks. And that bill, that part of the bill was then voted out in the next round. But I think government is thinking in the right direction, and there is a lot of interest on central government digital dollars, and that's a very exciting use case, and also a controversial one. If you talk to the people in the crypto space, they will point to issues like, well, that's co-opting the blockchain technology by government for their own purposes, and it'll make surveillance a big issue. So controversial one, but still very interesting to put money directly into digital wallets of individuals. And in a post-pandemic world, I think that kind of use cases will be looked upon very significant. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about use cases that these companies are developing. Andrei, back to you.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So the use case I wanted to talk today is the network, the blockchain network that we have in mind that we're building for the Coca-Cola bottlers. And as already mentioned, the bottling business is really a business network of independent organizations who are, at the end, they're playing a role of a supplier and a customer to each other with all the inefficiencies and problems that you could see in the operations and transactions between the trading partners. So what we're seeing, the opportunity here is we're building the blockchain, we're building the trust between the organizations, and then we're automating, optimizing their processes using the shared data that they're sharing between each other on the network, and using some of the business logic or business rules that they have in place today to checks and limits or what can be ordered, and encoding them as smart contract rules so they can be checked automatically.
Yes, I have a question for you as you build this further.
Sure.
What were the drivers behind selecting blockchain as a technology of choice? What did you not have in your current systems, or what was the hindrance or obstacles in the current system that forced you to even look at blockchain?
So I would say if you look into the picture of all the bottlers that do exist today in the current environment, they're all different companies with their own IT systems. They run their business in their own way, even though they are franchise owners, they have their own decisions. So I don't think it's it's not going to be anytime soon when they can start using a single system to operate, or they would trust a single party to do that for them. Some of the trust issues, or sometimes it just doesn't make sense from the cost perspective to even be for everybody to be on the same platform, because you're talking about some really big publicly traded companies and some of the smaller bottlers who are very small, maybe covering a few counties. So we see the blockchain as being kind of a data fabric between all of them, and different companies can use this to their own need. But there will be standards and some of the open ways to communicate between them on the use cases that will help them eliminate the inefficiencies in the processing of transactions.
Right. Just a quick note for folks that are writing questions. If you could please hold on to your questions till the end of the discussion so we can all take them together. Thank you. Yeah, sorry, carry on, Andrei.
So the use case that we looked into, and it was we had several use cases, kind of several opportunities on the business side, and one of the opportunities were in the B2B space. And we thought it would be a good solution to apply the blockchain on, because this is really where you have the multiple participants, the independent companies. They have a need of both writing and reading data at the same time from the shared ledger. Sometimes there's some trust definitely between these companies because they're all operating under the same umbrella of the Coca-Cola brand, but yet they're different companies, right? So bringing this layer of trust between them was very, very important as well to actually let them start sharing some of the data. And as you can see on the picture on the left-hand side, kind of the traditional way how it was set up, or how it is set up now with some of the bottlers who are not on the blockchain yet, is you have these direct lines of communications, right? I need to order something from you. You need to let me know what I can order, because there are some rules that need to be applied, what can be produced, what can be ordered by which bottler. So very complex rules on that side. So there's a lot of human effort on both sides to make sure that on one side, I maintain the list of what I can sell to another party, and another party to make sure that when they order the correct thing. Otherwise, their order will be either rejected or will be reduced, which you don't really want to happen, because you expect your order to be fulfilled in full, and you have your planning cycles based on your purchase orders, right? So we thought it would be a great opportunity as we create a shared ledger using the blockchain technology, and let these companies communicate to each other through a channel on the blockchain, where they would post some of the data openly, and some of the data will be kept private, but then we would allow this direct communication through the same methods.
Right. Yeah. So quite a few questions come to my mind. One, is this system on top of the ERP infrastructure that the companies had already, or is it a separate system altogether that all the bottlers had to then get into?
I would say we developed the set of APIs that would allow any bottlers to connect their ERP systems to their nodes. So we developed it in a way so it's a separate system. It's not built on top of any specific platform, but the structures, the data structures, the event structures, they're designed in such a way so both parties, no matter which system they're using, can easily integrate to and start using for the integration.
Perfect. And you mentioned companies coming together in form of a network or a consortia. One of the challenges that I've heard very often is to figure out, well, what's my data? What's your data? What am I sharing and what am I not sharing? And a lot of the consortiums are still struggling with trying to get all the partners in a value chain to agree to some level of standards and then some level of data sharing. How did you solve that?
And this is exactly what our first discussion with the business, when we had both of them in the room talking about the concept. They talked about which data they would share. They talked about what they would like to see, and then they talked about what they would never share. And I think they came to agreement of kind of the minimum viable data on the blockchain that would allow them to have this progress or efficiencies, but still keep some of the information in the house.
Yeah.
So this exactly was a discussion between the parties, and as more bottlers, as more participants join the network, they'll have to either agree to this, or as becoming a part of the network, they become part of the governance of the network as well.
Right.
If they can vote down or vote for some additional information that they would like to share. But now it's becoming more, the voting mechanism rather than someone deciding what this information that we start sharing with,
Right.
in an uncontrolled way.
Right. That's a broader trend that we see that blockchain has, I would say, accelerated. It existed before as a term that we've now started to use often as co-opetition, where companies still try to maintain a level of competitive advantage using their own proprietary data, but then they figure out what to share so that they can cooperate or cooperate within the network and make it the network is more valuable than the individual data sets that are. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's great. So, can we move on?
Just wanted to, I talked about the specific example, just maybe wanted to show this slide here and say that the use case that I just described, it's live in production. It's been running for just over 8 months. And we have the real transaction, the real system integrated into it. And we have some real results coming back to the bottlers or to the companies who invested their time and kind of piloted it as an innovation project from the incubation to realization, and they want to extend it now. So now we're in the process of inviting additional participants and growing the network because we know what is the tangible benefit of this. And we did some ROI studies and time savings and the opportunity value that they can gain. And now we just want to exponentially increase it by adding more and more participants. But overall, in our mind, is as you grow the network for a specific use case, you also have an opportunity to look into enhancing or adding additional use cases. And this picture just shows kind of our internal supply chain lifecycle, very simplistic way. So you buy raw materials, you manufacture your product, you move it with your own transportation or third-party carriers to a distribution center, from production center to distribution center, and then the distribution center distributes it to the stores on the red trucks, where we deliver the product to the stores. And if you look at the blockchain today, we just implemented this piece of a puzzle from a manufacturer to a distributor. But as we grow the network, we also have an opportunity to start building the full kind of concept of the Coca-Cola bottling network, or not necessarily Coca-Cola either. It could be any product that the participant carry and sell in this network.
Yeah.
So we see an opportunity or kind of bigger picture here that we can build upon, but we don't want to boil the ocean here. We want to get the tangible results as we go. As we build up the solution, we deliver the use cases, and we can have some results as we go back to the participants.
What's interesting here is you've used a token as a medium of payment within the network. Now that's unique in the sense that a lot of enterprises don't think of tokens as something that they need. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So we're not using tokens today, right? So what's happening today is same invoice is issued, and then the payment is done through the normal way how they've been doing before. But the idea is that you could do the cross-company netting. You can issue a token that would have a value that would be attached to a digital asset or physical asset and a digital asset on the blockchain. So this is one of the ideas. And then another idea could be, it's more Coca-Cola, maybe corporate use case, but you could start issuing tokens and rewarding your consumers for providing some of the point of consumption information, and also sharing some of the information about recalls and traceability to the consumer so they can check if something is recalled or some information about the product. So, and this is not what we currently have, but this is more of a view of how we can evolve the blockchain in future.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Sherry. Sherry, I would love to know what kind of blockchain use cases you've developed and what was the driver behind choosing blockchain as a technology, and what was the business case that you had to convince folks to adopt.
Yep, sure. So we, of course, decided to start with something easy and went straight for identity in 2015 when,
Very easy.
nobody even knew what blockchain was at that point. So yeah, go big or go home, right? So we built an app with blockchain. It was based on the idea of a digital enrollment where you would scan your passport information and then be able to use that to travel, and then have that verified by an agent or effectively notarized or stamped when you got to the airport. And then that way, when you did your check-in, the person at bag drop didn't need to check your ID. The TSA would need to recheck your ID. It was to create that framework for trust as part of the process. And like I say, at that point, people didn't even understand what blockchain was. So we spent a lot of our time educating them on the technology and what the value, proposition was for creating this integrated, collaborative framework for trust and to eliminate some of those handoffs and paper laden processes. So we said, okay, we need to slow down a bit. And so that led to our project called Flight Chain, which was taking publicly available information, flight status information, and using that to create a framework where two airports or two airlines could share information backed by blockchain as a way to start demonstrating how this would work and without compromising any private information, because all of this information is already publicly known, publicly held. So it created a really easy way to start, working together and bringing different organizations together to look at how that would work. That was really successful, and that then led us to the Aviation Blockchain Sandbox, where we took that to a global level and across our customer base and opened up the doors for all of our different member airlines and airports to participate so that they could learn more and experiment more. So we created a free platform that we made available for them. It was on Fabric, and we gave them sample code, set up, all the Slack channels and the GitLab projects and everything so that they could get their hands dirty and play with the technology more. And then we'd have, different phone calls and help them, with the questions they were having. And out of that organically grew different projects where we would then work with a subset of airlines or airports that had common interest that they wanted to work together to create a project of their own. And so we helped support them with that.
Right.
Out of that, simultaneously, we were also working on a couple of other initiatives around cargo and smart ULD, incorporating IoT as part of the process for perishables. So, if you think about the air industry as, we've got cargo, we've got MRO, aircraft parts and maintenance, and all the complexities of that, and complex supply chains that sometimes involve more than 20 different organizations just to book a ticket and get on a plane. And so that's then a natural evolution outside of the identity space. Is we formed the MRO Blockchain Alliance that brings multiple entities together to look at how do we create provenance for aircraft parts, so that even though it doesn't happen very often, when you sell an airplane, there's a book about yay big of all the paperwork for all the parts history and the maintenance history. So again, back to that digitization of looking at how can we move those from paper to a digital format and then use blockchain to create the provenance, the history, to prove that the part was legitimately obtained from an available and trusted source, and to try to help make the process of selling an aircraft smoother, so that those records were immediately available and could provide trust to the party that was acquiring the new aircraft.
Yeah.
And then what else? Smart ULD again was focused around perishables, and same thing is how can we make sure that those organic items were handled appropriately, that the temperature of the shipping container was what it was supposed to be in order to protect the integrity of the goods inside, and so using blockchain to back that. So things that were a little less controversial, I suppose, than identity, but we didn't give up, because we are founding stewards of the Sovereign Foundation and the Sovereign Network, and that's focused on the same thing as identity and looking at how do we create an ecosystem for self-sovereign identity to help cut down on the amount of identity theft and as well as fraud, as our industry is equally plagued with, unfortunately, both of those challenges. And so we're still very committed to looking at how we leverage self-sovereign identity, the promise of blockchain, and mobile or digital passports, digital driver's license, digital credentials in order to facilitate those travel processes. And obviously working with our government organizations as well to help educate them and make sure that their needs are met, because they're heavily regulated. Lots of concerns around, making sure that the right person gets on the plane, that they've been properly vetted as part of that process. So a lot of work with TSA, U.S. Customs and Border Protection in this country, other organizations like the likes of ICAO and IATA, who kind of govern our industry, and a lot of time spent with those to help, make sure that we create a framework that works on a global basis as well.
That's very exciting. Identity itself and self-sovereign identity is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So we won't spend too much time, but what I want to mention here is, it seems to me, looking across different use cases, that there's some few themes that come out. One is that there are a lot of manual processes across different agencies, different entities, that you are then automating. So blockchain becomes a means of business process automation and further improvement. And then if you take the notion of self-sovereign identity, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, it means that the user has the sovereignty or ownership of their own identity, because it is organically theirs. So how do we implement that so that the data could be shared, but still the ownership is maintained and shared in a quick, efficient, effective way, so that we can get somebody on the plane, or we can get a perishable from one point to the other. And that's a theme that I would say exists across multiple use cases, even the previous one, business process automation, and then taking identity of an asset, be it a physical asset or a human, and then making sure that the provenance is tracked, or their activities are tracked, and then they're shared in a privacy preserving way. So what I wonder is, your use case is something that you would have to deal with in a very regulated environment, as you said. So what are the challenges you faced developing this over the last 4 to 5 years? What was the most important or most difficult challenge? Was it the technical architecture? Was it resources, talented people to code this stuff? Was it the business case? Was it the funding to light these projects up? Was it the partners, or the leadership, or the education involved?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's not really technology, because the technology is continuing to evolve, right? And it's come a long way in the years that we've been working with it. So, but I think that evolution is going to continue. And I'll say, most of the times we don't even use the B word when we talk to our customers anymore, right? It's almost like, ooh, look at my Java. Ooh, look at my Oracle, right? Nobody does that anymore. And so we try to not make the conversation about the technology, but to make it more about the collaboration and, the ability for these different entities to share information without giving away their secret sauce. And so a lot of time spent on, the biggest challenge, I think, has been making sure that we find people that we can work with that have common interests, right? There's no point in working with an airline that flies in Asia with an airport that's in the United States that they don't have service with, and another airline in the Middle East where there's no overlap. So they have to have a common network and a common interest in solving that challenge. So once we find and identify those parties, then it really becomes a discussion about being able to figure out where the overlaps are and where the pain points are. And if they've got gaps in the data today, blockchain doesn't fix that. Right? So they have to figure out how they're going to address those gaps as well. And so we spend a lot of time really in that kind of consultative approach before we even get to the technology of trying to make sure that we can effectively map the process of what it is today and what we want good to look like. And then, working with them to help fill those gaps. So I wouldn't say, it's not an insurmountable hurdle, but it's certainly, not an overnight project either, right? There's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Excellent. Let's come to Frank. Frank, could you share with us what kind of use cases you've been developing with NCR and what were the drivers behind it?
Yeah, my pleasure. So one of the things that we kind of looked at in terms of areas, right, we're an innovation lab, and so we're trying to identify opportunities to improve the experience of our customers, right, the merchants, the banks, that are places that all of us shop and bank at, and then also their customers, the end user, people like you and me and everybody on this call, who are the people going in and interacting with these businesses. And so that it kind of drew us to a few different pillars that ended up kind of coalescing around an application that we think there is value in driving through blockchain approach, as opposed to just the hammer and nail kind of Cindermar. It's a great technology. We love talking about it. It looks great in press releases, but there's really nothing behind the words. And so that kind of centered around identity, payments, and then how data could be used in a privacy-centric way for value. And so if you think about the current world of commerce and banking, there's really no substitute, and there likely won't be much of a change in the need to understand who somebody is. Things aren't going to be free in 5 years, right? So payment and commerce in general are just going to be part of the daily life of every person who engages in these industries. And more so, as I kind of alluded to earlier, we all generate just vast amounts of data. And I think for quite a long time, there was a clear value in that data. Lots of organizations built their business model on using that data. And there's been a shift in individuals realizing that they don't really know what their data is being used for, and it's floating out there in all these different formats, that there's a need to kind of bring that back and gain some control back over it. And so we started looking at across those different pillars. The most obvious one for us and the kinds of customers that we serve was around payments. It's also, I think, natural for Atlanta, right? What is it, 70% of all payment transactions in the world flow through our state. And so you didn't have to look hard to think, hey, part of the story should be around payment. And so that initially drove our first use cases, and the ones that we actually developed the concepts and built working versions of them that can actually be run in production, was around taking digital currencies and enabling any consumer to use them at a merchant. And I'll get into some of the challenges behind that, but some of the obvious reasons for that are the fees involved, right? There are, for some of our customers, they spend upwards of $4 or $5 billion a year for a single customer on interchange fees. Wow. You're involved in them accepting your payment, right? You're there, you want to buy something, you swipe your card, you add that up over the year, it's billions of dollars. And there's an opportunity to lower some of that overhead associated with just accepting payment and allow the merchants, also to improve the consumer experience, share some of that savings back with them. And then, additionally, looking at it from the consumer convenience side, starting to drive some of these newer digital-based payment mechanisms that don't have as much fraud involved with them, to reduce some of the issues with chargebacks and disputes and stolen credit cards and the like. And I think also another aspect of this was on the payment side, is around unbanked and underbanked people that actually drove value. There's a large percentage, in the United States, it's anywhere between 25 and 30 million people. Some of our customers, for example, a bank we talked to in South Africa, 60% of their population is in that unbanked, underbanked, category. And so finding ways to bring these people into the digital economy who don't have access to traditional banking services and could create a new relationship with a retailer that actually is around being able to interact online, order things that, as we move towards this digital economy, we don't also want to leave all these people behind who don't have access to, some of the financial services that probably most of us on this call don't even think about anymore. But they're still, luxuries for many people. And so that drove this use case around payments initially and enabling that in the standard kind of merchant environment to have all those benefits.
Right. You mentioned underbanked and unbanked. So, the skeptic in me has heard that phrase being used as a driver for blockchain and driver for digital wallets, etc., for years. And the skeptic in me still wonders if that's something that companies just use because, hey, it sounds good, it's a goodwill mechanism, and why not? It's an ideal utopian idea that should be shared. But are we really making an impact on that? So in your experience, in especially developing countries and even in the United States, what kind of impact you've seen with that?
I think it's still early in that space. I mean, there's some real technology challenges there and, and user adoption that we still have to overcome. But I would say, in a completely cold capitalist way, and I believe in the other side of it too, and that's part of what motivates us. But if you take all of that out and just say, what's in it for me, right? For a lot of our merchants, upwards of 50% of their transactions today are done with cash. And that's actually an extremely expensive form of payment to accept. A lot of people don't realize that cash can be as expensive as credit cards because of the handling, the cash in transit insurance, all of the issues around, the cash just going missing. And so there's a real value in actually removing some of the cash from the equation. There's a whole new dynamic, these days around what can that cash transmit, right? In the interest of reducing the transmission vectors in cash. And then, quite honestly, there's another side of it too of people that go into a store, let's say, to engage in money services like remittance or like exchanging physical notes for digital currency. There's a very strong history of how much money they leave behind. And so for some of the merchants we work with, it's upwards of 25 to 30% of I go in and cash a check for $500, that much of it actually stays in the store. And that's been, sometimes difficult to capture and give people a reason to do that. And so there are some real economic drivers for our customers to actually do this, even beyond, I think, the good that it can do as well. And that's something that is encouraging them to do that, even for the most skeptic or, the financially minded members of the organization of why should we do this other than, it's a great PR stunt.
Yeah. So what kind of challenges did you face developing these use cases? You mentioned 3 of them. Is it the leadership? Is it funding? Is it technical architecture? Is it resources? What exactly did you have to push through to even create this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big ones is certainly executive support. And, it sounds like for everybody that is sharing their use cases, this wasn't a journey that took 2 or 3 months and then, you got to the finish line and got the high fives, right? This is a long process and this takes a commitment. And one that, as much as myself or somebody else in our roles believes in, we tend to have some executive sponsorship to carry through the typical periods where maybe the first idea didn't work and failed, right? And we probably all have some great examples of those things that seemed really promising, just never got off the ground. So I think the executive support part of it has been critical to us, and having kind of the leadership of our CTO who's behind us and helps drive these conversations and get the support that we need. And the other side that's been a huge challenge on the adoption side is the cart before the horse problem that we deal with, which is there are still not a whole lot of users that have access to digital currency. And so even though these benefits exist and we've been able to see them happen in the real world, you have a very small percentage of the population that has adopted already, right? So if you think about kind of the technology adoption curve for a lot of these things, we're still in the very early stages of innovators, early adopters, where even growing to 10 million people in, let's say, the United States, that's still only a small percentage of the population. And to get to mass market, I think is required a lot of vision in where this could be and laying the foundation to get there, because we see that a lot with our conversations. Merchants say there's no consumers say there's nowhere to spend this. Why do we care? Who's going to be the prime mover that drives this forward? And so for us, that's actually driven a lot of investment in, I mentioned the self-sovereign identity or digital identity concept before, but being able to take that and build that into loyalty systems, into age verification and identity solutions that are, part of interacting with your bank, proving your age when you go to a store, to a restaurant, and so on. Some of these things that you don't really have to know, to go Sherry the B word, right? You don't have to know what this is. You don't have to care what's under the cover. You don't have to be a technology enthusiast. It's cheaper, it's easier to use, it's more secure. Other reasons for me to adopt it. And that's, I think, where we're seeing a lot of activity in this space going forward, as the payments area shows promise, but is going to be slow to adopt. And we know that, and we understand it's going to take a longer commitment. But to start to build this technology into some of other solutions that become part of what people use, because it's part of the app or part of the merchant, software that they interact with, and they don't have to really care what's behind the scenes.
Right. You mentioned adoption. So to me, it's great that the executives at NCR and your team is educating folks on how this might be adopted, and they have patience. Because a lot of the use cases just get killed at that level, that, the market is not there yet. Two sides of the network, and one of them is not there yet, so why even bother, right? Why? Yeah, it's a cool technology, but why even bother if you can't create business out of it or revenue stream out of it today? So what are those conversations that look like for you when you have them?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach. We have to find something that's got clear business value that can be realized today, and that helps provide fuel in the tank to continue the exploration of some of these others that are going to take longer to evolve. So I'll say one that's kind of interesting in the current time we're in. It's been accelerated by the COVID pandemic. It's something that is getting out to be in the real world today, and something that we feel is going to be adopted much sooner than we probably expected, is the need to validate your identity when you interact with restaurants and retailers. And so that's an example of the payment story is going to take longer to get there, and there's going to be markets where we see it happening sooner than others before it becomes a major revenue impact for us. But leveraging things like digital identity in the commerce space are being accelerated to enable you to go pick up, and self-serve yourself when you go to a restaurant, right? I don't know if folks, somebody on this call is, I'm sure, use this, right? But the idea of actually going to a restaurant now and never getting out of your car, getting your food, and actually getting an alcoholic beverage to go, they still need to comply with laws. They still need to prove how old you are. And people don't generally want to hand their driver's license over to somebody else to have them check it and hand it back to you. So can I do that without any contact? And, moreover, why does the person maybe standing outside the window of my car door or in the lane, when I'm buying something at a grocery store, why do they need to know my home address, my first and last name, my month, day, and year that I was born to allow me to buy, a bottle of wine? That's information is not necessary. They need to know, am I greater than 21 in age? That's all they need to know. So some of those things are, becoming real world use cases. They're getting embedded into some of these applications, and the retailers that we're working with on that are some of the largest in the world that are starting to roll this out to their customers. And we think that's going to accelerate in just the next few months here.
That's exciting. And so thank you for sharing all that. Let's play a quick lightning round, if you will. So top 2 things that executives of companies looking to develop blockchain use cases need to keep in mind. And we have covered some of them. This is just to summarize. So top 2 things that executives need to keep in mind while developing blockchain real world application and use cases. And we'll start with you, Frank.
Sure. I mentioned a couple a moment ago. One that I would like to add would be that, at least in our experience, you can't build all this stuff yourself. And so there's a a real need, and maybe for some companies this is an easy transition. For others, it's more of an uncomfortable, new arrangement to make, right? In terms of working with partners, working with startups, other people in the ecosystem. But for us, that's been critical to move quickly, and so not being afraid to embrace extending your interactions to other organizations, and not necessarily trying to start off, I got to go hire 10 blockchain experts and bring them in-house and have them work for me.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Frank. Andrea?
Yeah, so I think if I name two things, I would kind of echo what Frank said. You can't really do everything yourself. So first thing that I would think would be important is embrace the open source collaboration, right? So the big enterprises and companies, they used to develop their own code and they kind of keep it private. But here you have really an opportunity to give more than you take, right? So if you're working on some integration or some business problem that you think could benefit your partners, but also sometimes could benefit your competitors, but don't be afraid of sharing what you see, what you find out, and then taking what you need. So I think this and embracing the open source, and secondly, again, for the business, for organizations to be able to work as a consortia, as a network together, and maybe sitting at the same table again with your competitors or companies you didn't work together historically. So I think
so open source and co-opetition.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Sherry?
So I think first is, thinking about the organization, right? Like blockchain for one doesn't make sense, right? It really only adds value where you're trying to solve complex issues where there's handoff between parties, or maybe it's business units or, parts of the organization that don't normally work together but have a high level of interdependency. So I'd say, making sure that those are the problems that you're looking at and trying to use blockchain to solve, because otherwise it's not really going to add value. Mm-hmm. And equally, I'd say is, when you're thinking about blockchain, is don't think about, I want some of this. Where does it fit in my technology stack, right? It's more about business process analysis. So looking at the process of, where you're having an issue or having a challenge, understanding that process, understanding the data flows, and then working to figure out how blockchain can help address that. Because again, if you don't have that data today, blockchain doesn't fix that. So there might be other challenges in the business that you first have to address before you can even look at those collaboration frameworks. So thinking about it from a business process level, I think is also a good starting point.
Interesting. So the why before the how. How is easier to solve than why? And actually that's in line with a lot of things that I've heard in projects that I've worked on. A lot of times it's the technologists in the house that are very excited about the technology, but then there is not enough of a why yet discovered or developed to say, okay, this is what's going to add value, to your point, above and beyond the existing tech stack that they already have.
Yeah, like Frank said, right? The hammer and the nail, right? It becomes the technology hammer looking for a nail. And so, it's kind of the reverse approach, I suppose.
Definitely. So let's open this up to questions, and there are a few already. So I'll jump right into them, and feel free to write yours now. So this is for NCR. Can blockchain help retailers and restaurant customers vis-a-vis COVID-19 append the industries? I think you already started talking about that in contactless delivery and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we've seen the kind of the biggest immediate impact has just been the drive for much more delivery, much more curbside, and still, the need to pay securely and to be able to, in many cases, prove your identity and your age. And if you think about that in the grocery context as well, it's not just about buying alcoholic beverages, but it's also pharmacy pickup and being able to, purchase items that have other sorts of, I need to know who this person is to be able to clear release of this item. And so I think those have been some areas that we've seen traction on. And I think over time that'll continue to be, at least we're expecting to be a habit that probably won't subside back to the levels it was before, right? As people get more accustomed to it. I'm sure we all anecdotally have, friends and relatives who never did self-checkout before, who never ordered online, who didn't know what Instacart was. Even 2 years from now, once you get used to those things, right? Habits usually take several weeks to ingrain, but once they get established, they're hard to go back. So we expect to see some of those things stick, and things to become much more digital in terms of their interaction between the consumer and and the merchant. And so those are some of the things that we think can both drive down and save money for merchants, open up new consumer usage, and then make some of these experiences that tend to be more frictionful, right? Waiting for somebody to come check my ID, being annoyed by having to get stopped and have to have somebody override. Those things can be removed from the equation. I think there's a lot more use cases that we're exploring, but they're more early in their development.
Right. So in fact, there was a question related to that, which I think you've inherently answered. The question was, what about blockchain to improve customer experience when dealing with brands? And that's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, I'll add one more there. I mean, one that we're kind of excited about. There's a recent announcement, probably a lot of the folks in this space have heard about, but the Trust Over IP Foundation that has been kind of announced. It's been under the works for a while, but organizations like Evernym that built the Sovereign Network and a number of other large organizations are kind of still in the early stages of developing some standards around this. But one that we think in regards specifically to brands is getting back to that data story. There's a huge value in understanding not just people between the ages of 35 and 50 who are male who live in this place buy these things, but what does Frank want, right? Or what does Sherry want to buy? What is our actual needs? We generally don't want to share that with every company out there because you can imagine the ensuing spam avalanche that would attack us. But there is a value in trying to do that in terms of our brand interaction in a privacy-centric way. And so doing things that preserve privacy but enable your average person to get the things they need, to save money on them, to improve and make their lives more convenient, I think is another application that has value here because it's in its nature inter-party. There's lots of different organizations that don't necessarily trust each other, and there's still a need to share, what should be my data and not just become everybody's data the second I share it.
Right. So this is a question for Andrea. And Michael asks, can you say which CONA bottlers are using blockchain today, and what do you think the adoption period will be for the others?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a public information. We actually published an article on this as well. The first bottler who went live was a Coca-Cola United bottler who's here in Atlanta area, also covering with headquarters in Alabama. And then the bottler they're interact with are from Kentucky areas, Coca-Cola Clark. And actually Coca-Cola Clark, they carry both the Coca-Cola brands as well as the beer and liquor. So there's an opportunity there as well on what kinds of transactions can be done. And I think from the adoption perspective, we really want to look into this more aggressively and roll it out to as many participants as possible, because we see the value there. But again, it takes us back to the point where we need to maybe go slowly in the beginning and educate the leads of these companies and kind of help them understand the benefits and why this way, but maybe not another way, is the best choice to do. So I think kind of education and describing the benefits, and likely we have the calculations behind the use case that was already developed and put in production. So it's going to become easier and easier as we grow the network. But maybe if I were to say what the plans are in the beginning of the year, I was hoping that 2020 would be the aggressive rollout. But now we know that in the past 2 months, the bottlers, they had some other bigger issues to deal with. So this could impact the timelines, but I see maybe the next 12 to 18 months.
Sweet. Okay. So let's talk about a technical question that's come. How about interoperability between blockchain networks? So that's an interesting question in multiple ways. Andrei, since you're talking, we'll just start with you. I know that you've developed your own network. Did you have to interface with other blockchain networks?
We have not, but this is a big topic. I think the first thing that we really need to think about is how do we develop our interfaces or applications so they can talk in future to other networks. And first comes in mind is you have to follow the standards. So in this case, we're working a lot with the GS1 US organization on the standards, specifically standards that they have today that can be applied for the blockchain applications like GS1, 128, or EPCIS, and how they're being used in conjunction with the blockchain developments. I think so. Number one is looking at standards, and so we can talk apples to apples when we ready to talk across the network.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think from the technology perspective, there's a lot of interesting development going on. I think some of the languages they're being written, like Damo, if you heard about that.
Yep.
You could run a verification in different stacks, right? But it's going to run as a smart contract and check the rules in different stacks, and maybe with this you can provide the interoperability.
Yeah.
In the network.
Yeah. So standards to me is a chicken and egg. And it needs to be developed for each industry or each type of use case. So it's an interesting question to look into. Let me go to Sherry. Sherry, have you had to deal with interoperability with other blockchains?
Yeah, and it's an issue right now. Each one of them is still a proprietary standard, if you will, of its own. They don't interoperate. And that is one of the big hurdles at the moment. I know there are groups that are actively trying to look at that, but that's why we, for now, tend to focus on that same app tier of, what, and focusing on what's the right data to put into the blockchain and what's the minimum amount of data that we can put out there. And while, still using the standard type of app architecture and interfaces that the airline or airport community are already used to using, and spending a focus on that, with blockchain as more of like an underpinning technology for the proof or the provenance, rather than being like a core essential element at this point.
So do you think there is a risk as we develop this blockchain space strategically, there is a risk of some companies having developed the standard or pushing the standard harder, and some companies landing on those standards and those platforms, and then the rest of them sort of get left off the island?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think, well, I haven't looked at this in a while, but at one point, what was it, like $300 trillion revenue potential. And so that meant we immediately went from like 50 different blockchain companies to like, 250 overnight. Yeah. And so, it's almost like the quest for the gold right now. And there's absolutely going to be a convergence. And, the right platform, or the platform that's going to survive, is probably still yet to be seen. Because, the work is still ongoing to make sure that it's performant and scalable and interoperable. So I think, the final base for that is still to be determined. Right. The horizon for that, could be within the next year, could be in the next 5 years. I don't have my crystal ball handy right now to tell me that, right?
Fair enough. Yeah. Frank, have you had to deal with interoperability and transacting with other blockchains?
Yeah, I mean, some of this is inherent in kind of designing these systems, right? And the fact that there isn't just one solution, right? There's not one protocol stack. There's not one programming language to create these systems in. And for some of our customers, even, they are already down an adoption curve, right? And so we can't go to them and dictate the choices that they need to make. For example, different banks, looking at different digital identity providers for their KYC, regulatory compliance. And that, I think, for us is it's still developing. There's some, I think, promising work in the standard space, but that is one area that we're very focused on continuing to watch closely and support, because for us, particularly around payment and digital identity, a future world where each of us has 17 different identities is not an economically feasible one. There's too much integration. There's too many challenges. Even if they're all blockchains, even if we could somehow build a universal business adapter that connects all of these webs together, there's going to be a lot of wasted effort and complexity in integration. And I think, as any of us that have been in this, at least the technology industry for a while, standards are very difficult things to manage, to get people to agree on things, to not end up with the lowest common denominator being useless, right? And so it's an evolving challenge that's there. But I do believe, much like there were lots of competitors to the network protocol that existed, right? And we finally settled on IP. It may not be the best protocol in the world, but the fact that everybody uses it and unlocks capability that would be much more difficult if there was, still 14 different competing network standards out there. So if you start to think about trust extending across these networks and using it as a way to exchange data and information securely, it's got to be interoperable for this to scale. And so that's, I think, an area that we're not there yet, but people are spending enough time that there's some promise that in the coming years we'll get closer.
Right. It's a standards war that we have seen over and over again in technology. You can talk about telecom, you can talk about LT versus WiMAX about 15 years ago. You can talk about even PC versus Apple. It goes into philosophy and it goes into how software is developed, and that's a challenge we'll have to solve for going forward. The question is, who wins? There will be consolidation for sure. There will be certain standards or platforms that will be more adopted than the other. And I think we're going through a phase now where there's still more proliferation, but we are slowly starting to see, depending on the use case, some people coalescing around a certain standard for one reason or the other. Perfect. So that's about does it for us today. Thank you all for joining. This has been an excellent in-depth discussion. I've learned quite a bit. And if you want to engage further, please join the Tag Blockchain Society. Feel free to reach out to us with your ideas on topics or events that we must and should do. As we said, our approach is to keep blockchain as a foundational technology and to explore all different use cases, be it digital identity, be it payments, be it crypto, be it tokenization, be it platforms, be it supply chain, healthcare, retail, financial services, you name it. And one of the other intentions, as I mentioned before, is to create an environment for this kind of intellectual discussion and to create a positive sentiment for blockchain as an investment for projects within large companies. And this is one thing that I've seen happen, in the space in the last few years. There's sort of this chasm between startups and enterprises. And what you might have seen from today's discussion, that there is a need to collaborate even with startups and enterprises, because not everybody has the same answers or the same type of resources or the same knowledge base. So there is value to be had in that collaboration. And I hope that we can create an environment to foster that level of collaboration here in Georgia. So thank you, Sherry, Andrea, and Frank, for your thoughtful and knowledgeable insights. It is important for people to see real-world applications of credible companies using blockchain, and your insights are more valuable than you can imagine. And thank you for fighting the good fight. I know it's not easy out there trying to convince people of this new shiny thing, and it's like trying to explain the internet back in the 90s. So you will remember these days when these technologies and the use cases that you're developing will be just commonplace for all of us. Either we're buying things or we're traveling. It'll just, as a consumer, we wouldn't know, but we know that you are part of creating this journey for all of us. So thank you so much for that effort.
Thanks, Roop.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everybody. And feel free to send your thoughts and feedback. And we will see you at the next event. And stay safe. Wash your hands. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.